and they curate the government that will ultimately, effectively be imposed on its members and generally the electorate.
Well, sticking with election stories, very few political parties focusing on the issue of land. Just 5-6 years ago, it was one of the biggest issues on the political agenda, despite the fact both the ANC and the EFF said they wanted to vote in favour of a change to the constitution that would allow the expropriation of land without compensation. In the end, they couldn't agree on whether the land that would be expropriated would be given to new owners or be nationalised. If you look at our history, our racialised inequality, the issue of land ownership should always be a major issue in our politics. Peter Setou is the chief executive at Vumelana Advisory Fund. They look at issues around land. Peter, good afternoon to you. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I find it fascinating that as land ownership reflects our history, very few of the political parties are actually campaigning on the issue of land. What does that tell us about our politics?
Well, thanks for having me. I share your sentiments that land reform is obviously an emotive issue for South Africans, both black and white, by the way. And we've seen quite a number of, particularly your established parties, we've seen them actually really taking, or rather focusing on land reform and land redistribution as really a rallying tool by way of really getting voters to vote for them. So it's not surprising, considering the fact that the land question is so important to South Africans in general.
And yet it doesn't seem to be the dominant issue in this election at all. That surprises me.
Well, I wouldn't really say it's not a dominant issue. You must realize that as a country, we've got a number of challenges that are really facing us as a nation. So land reform really forms but one of the many aspects that political parties are supposed to, or rather those who would be in government have to focus on. So I do think it has really received prominence in some of the manifestos of some of the political parties.
There's so many other issues around land, and one of them is trying to assess how much progress we've made in transforming land ownership patterns. And maybe I should just say what it is. How much progress we've made in ensuring that there are more black people owning the land and fewer white people owning the land. It's quite difficult to assess that, isn't it?
Well, I think we really need to take a step back as South Africans and really reflect on progress that has been made in land reform. The reality is that there has been some progress that has been made in land reform. I mean, if you look at the total hectareage that has been really distributed, I mean, if you look at just restitution, land restitution itself, I mean, just over 4 million, around 4 million hectares have already been transferred to black South Africans, and that the land redistribution just over 5 million hectares. So collectively, you're looking at just around 9 million hectares that have already been given to black South Africans. I think the real issue that we need to be focused on is that there's a real need to balance the manner in which land is acquired and how it's used. I mean, usually as a nation and as South Africans, we are usually fixated with acquiring land. And what happens once that land has been transferred remains largely ignored. Hence, some of the failures or some of the complaints that we hear people really complaining about land reform projects. And I think to address this, we need to make sure that once the land is actually transferred to the previously disadvantaged persons, post-settlement support is actually provided to make sure that they're able to work the land, and in particular to make sure that they get the requisite support in the form of capital that they can use to work the land, access to market, as well as the requisite skill sets. Having said that, I think there's a huge need to really increase the resources that are earmarked for supporting land reform beneficiaries, and to ensure that such funds, once they've been earmarked, that they are really used for the intended beneficiaries. I think it's one thing that we need to focus on. As I've said, land is really an emotive issue, and we often experience disputes amongst beneficiaries, and it's something that we don't always really focus on. We need to make sure that we have a mechanism through which the disputes that or rather, we need to make sure that we've got dispute resolution mechanisms, particularly for land reform beneficiaries, because we hear from time to time that there are infightings among beneficiaries of land reform. Sometimes the assets are really being destroyed and so on, and to the detriment of really job creation and other forms of support that our people out there really need. So this is one aspect that for me that we really need to focus on. And lastly, but not least, access to affordable finance, so that once you give people the land, over and above government really supporting them, you need to make sure that there is a way through which they can access affordable finance from your mainstream financial service providers.
Peter Setou, thank you, Chief Executive at the Vumelana Advisory.